and sorry I'm a little bit behind, but welcome to the Silver Spook Hangs Out with several indigenous relatives from around the world, and we're just gonna kind of talk about this supposed special day, and not just about this supposed holiday that's called Thanksgiving, but we're just gonna just be indigenous people, just hanging out and seeing what happens. This is how things often go with us. Time. We don't operate by the New York minute, or the colonial capitalist time frame. Sometimes I wish I was a little bit more on time, but it's okay. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here with some of my best friends, or some people that I've been on Twitch around, and I'm really happy to be talking to them like live for the first time. Leaping Larry is our Twitch indigenous Twitch streamer that is putting out really great content all the time, and Meagan Byrne is our returning Silver Spook indigenous fellow game developer and maker of the amazing, groundbreaking indigenous cyber noir adventure game Hill Agency that everybody should immediately go out and buy it again for the first time. Buy it for the Christmas or whatever holiday gifts you might want to give to your fellow gamers. Demand that they stream it and let it take over the world. I mean, decolonize the world. Anyways, sorry. So yeah, if you guys want to just introduce yourselves a little bit more, feel free, or just jump in.
Yeah, I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tanzi, Meagan Isikasun, Aptuako Sisan. Hey everybody, my name is Meagan and I am Aptuako Sisan, federally recognized as Métis of the Métis Nation of Ontario. And yeah, I'm I'm a game designer. And I put out Hill Agency with my studio, Achimas Dalasan Games. It was really awesome getting to work with so many other Indigenous creatives. They always shout out to my creative partner in crime, Siade. Sade. Yeah, so that's me.
Awesome. Yeah. But
Here, Pazul Tom.
well, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem. Pazul comrades. Leaping Larry is what I go by on Twitch here. I'm a Mi'kmaq city native, and I do a lot of talking about Juche. I work with an organization called Chunkaluda as well, which really started on Pine Ridge Reservation, but is all about bringing native communities and building dual power and mutual aid all across not just Turtle Island, but all across the world as well. Do a little bit of work with Peace Land and Bread as well on the side.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely know. I know Peace Land and Bread. Great. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming on. So I've if you are in the chat, feel free to ask like quite well, try to not ask the silliest colonizer questions if you can manage, but what's up, Strin? Also in the chat, and thanks Holly for moderating as always. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I didn't really have a specific plan for this. We just I do want to eventually at some point get like more updates from Meagan about how the game dev world is going. For being like, I also make games and also indigenous person myself, so I'm always interested. But yeah, I guess I don't think we never really heard from you, Larry, before. So maybe you can maybe elaborate a little bit on you mentioned like Pine Ridge and some of the activities and the organizations that you're with. I watched a little bit. I watched some of your streams, and it seemed like really interesting work. Like maybe you could talk a little bit more about either one or both of those organizations.
Yeah. So, well, I do work with. I guess the two organizations I work with is called First Nations International, with which I organize with a comrade named Red Falcon, and Chunkaluda, which is the organization started by my comrade Zit Cato. my specialty really is like, trying to identify dogmatism, and this is why I study Juche very heavily, trying to identify dogmatism, especially dogmatic tendencies in, the communist movement here in the West, especially. And part of why we organized Chunkaluda is the recognition that, there is this dogmatic deficit in the communist quote unquote organizations in the West and a lot of places, I think. And yeah, we with Chunkaluda, we started organizing years ago, um, mostly doing online fundraising and stuff to get land back in order to, you know, provide a home not just for increasing the number of buffalo in the area, but also we wanted to build like a distribution center and a base there where we can then expand outwards and help other nations as well. First Nations International is sort of more like the party front of that, sort of like our own organization where we study. We have our points of unity where we sort of all agree on the various points, but we work a little bit with anarchists. We work with all various people, I guess. Yeah, I myself am a Mi'kmaq person. My grandmother, her community was like destroyed many years ago because it was led by all women. So her family was scattered, and then because of her marrying a white person, of course, they lost their indigeneity for many years, their status for a very long time. And it was a long, long fight for us as a family to reconnect as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that it was an all women organization, or it was a women organization, and that in particular, that's why it was destroyed. Yeah, how is the how is like the I was just on a video. I was just on a YouTube channel today, the last few days, being interviewed about what is land back. There's still a lot of questions, obviously from non-native people. Like when people ask you, I'm just curious. When people ask you, hey, let's say a non-native person, what's a land back? What do you tell them?
I mean, I just simply put it like it's unconditional land back to all First Nations. Like they ask sometimes, well, what does that mean for settlers? And I just simply explain to them, much like how Lenin explained that, the working class will work much better under a proletarian leadership. Well, the former settlers will work and live much better under indigenous leadership, whichever nation they're under. And my thing is like people always, go on about deportations and stuff like that. And if a particular nation feels like a person needs to be deported, I mean, that's up to them ultimately. But even more than that, I think just during liberation, during that struggle, you see with any kind of liberation like this, you see that's what happens, right? They voluntarily flee on their own because they know what the fuck is coming.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I mean, just right now with Palestine, right? You saw as soon as it broke out, the ones who have dual citizenship immediately start fleeing.
Mm-hmm. Like a million Israelis fled, right? Like day one, I think, something like that.
Yeah, and I think it would be the same thing here for the traders of the people who don't agree with First Nations liberation. I think the vast majority of them are going to flee anyway. And the rest of the people are going to realize that their interests are better served under First Nations leadership than it was under these bourgeois colonialists.
Yep. That's basically similar to basically what I was saying. Because people go, oh, land back means every single person has to go to Europe, or everyone's just going to be just unalived off of the planet who isn't indigenous, which is not what it means. Yeah. But anyways, just to dovetail to Meagan, I think the like Hill Agency is a game that is a post-colonial, so it's kind of jumping forward into the future. It's a post-colonial world in which it is set. So in a certain sense, like I guess like Hill Agency might be a post land back or post land back has occurred world. How do you like in light of like what's happening, and I don't know if you don't have to comment if you don't want to, but in light of what's happening in Palestine and what is happening right now in Canada, I just like there's obviously lots of actions constantly happening. How do you think people do you see that like Hill Agency is more relevant to people, or how are people like related to it? Meagan, do you get the question a lot?
Yeah. I mean, I actually just was at a conference. I was at the Muslim International Film Festival in Toronto, just like, oh my gosh, I think a week ago, which was like absolutely lovely. They invited me to come onto a panel to be just like an additional voice as an Indigenous person, because they were discussing what was going on in Palestine, and they'd had two women who one had lost a job and one had been dropped from her music label and these are two Palestinian women, and they were very upfront about the fact that they were Palestinian when they started these things. And yet, like, yes, these institutions were like, you know what? Like, I knew you were Palestinian, but I didn't realize you'd be like political. Which, if like, like the Indigenous person knows that, has had that conversation, right? Like, oh, I knew you were Indigenous. I didn't realize you'd be political. I'm like, me being alive is political. Come on. So like, there's definitely maybe I need to do another, or maybe I'll do another Hill Agencies where we address that. I think with this one, actually, okay, so Sade was like my creative partner on Hill Agency, was like, we're picking kind of a doomer reason for land back in our game, but that he also thought it was fair. So like, obviously lore that you're never going to get in the actual game is that the reason why the city's all emptied out was because of natural disasters. And so it wasn't so much that land was given back in a meaningful, yes, we're still here, but we want to work with you way. It was more in line with, because when I started writing this, there had just been a large tract of land given back to its traditional caretakers in the States because it was poisoned by the mine that was there that had been abandoned. So there was like nobody living there. They couldn't sell it to anybody because the amount of cleaning, the cost was too high. So they gifted it, which I thought was disgusting that they said that they would even describe it as gifted, back to the people who had been removed from there to make way for the mine. And of course, like now it's getting quite clean because they're allowed to practice their traditional land management techniques. So that was kind of how we envisioned the land back of, at least for the particulars of the city that Hill is in. The same time, like I don't think I call Hill Agency post-colonial. We called it on the brink of freedom, because I mean, I think I'm still in a space, I think a lot of us are still in a space where it's like, well, what would post-colonialism even look like? Like, really, what would that really look like? But for me, I was thinking, I think what we need to have a conversation right now is about that edge of the precipice into freedom, because that's when you get the wounded dog, wounded animal behavior from that overarching superstructure that does not want to let go of its power, knows it's dying. So like, that's when I think the most kind of damage can happen, when it's like knows it's on the way out, because then it's like freaking Atlas Shrugged, right? Or, oh, I'll just set it all on fire and not my problem anymore, I'm already going down. So we were, that was kind of where we were at, and it made sense in terms of like not really getting into spoilers, but just in terms of like the elite in the world and how they think about things. I thought that was an interesting mindset of like, dude, it's over. Why you gotta fight this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you gotta, why do you gotta keep just give up the basis? I wish they would just, the U.S. I mean, the good news. I mean, just from the Hawaii angle, the U.S. has just finished defueling Red Hill. Like last time I came on here, pretty sure I was still trying to do as much. I swear I spent 4 hours a day just trying to get information out about the U.S. military dumping jet fuel into the Hawaii's water supply. Mostly what I talk about for half the day was that, and it was like I had to like take a break because I was like basically like not burning out. I was just like over fighting or something. But anyways, but like the good news is after 2 years since the November 2021, it's almost 2 years, almost 2 years to the day. The U.S. military, they fought it the entire time. The U.S. Navy, the admirals were like, it's not the fuel. Like Secretary of the U.S. Navy, Secretary of Defense Del Toro was saying, Secretary of the Navy saying, it's not the gas in our tanks. There's just jet fuel in your water. I don't know how it got there. You know, they were literally gaslighting us like for they're still doing it actually. I was just watching there was the U.S. the head of the Indo-Pacific Command was like sitting in front of like all of these mothers with all their children that have been poisoned. They're military mothers too. I mean, of course, Native Hawaiians and people live in Hawaii all poisoned. But then military wives, like wives of colonels, are like sitting there. Why is our child is like has rashes all over the body? They're having seizures. We have permanent damage to all of our body parts. It smells like a gas station in our house. And the military husband, that's what's interesting. The military husbands are saying, you know, this water is perfectly fine. I don't know what you're saying, honey. I don't know what you're saying. And it's like amazing. They're still doing this. So it's like this is like straight up psychopathy. I mean, they're saying like, you don't want to, can't you just give up? You know, you're a wreck. You know, you can't launch your F-35s. You're never going to get any more wars won. You lost Ukraine. You're not going to even, you know, if you try to start something in the South China Sea, you're going to be hyper de-dollarized faster than, you know, you can say Lockheed Martin. You know, it's like, why don't you give up? But they're still like, that was amazing. I just watched it. Like this week, they finished defueling Red Hill after like millions of people, the Empire Files, everybody was out there like in Hawaii documenting this. And, you know, I was trying to go on every podcast I possibly could just to be like, I'm on Twitter every day, just like at Secretary Blinken, at Biden, at U.S. Navy, stop poisoning children in Hawaii by dumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of jet fuel in our water, right? And then they finally been forced to. The EPA has been covering for the U.S. military, so-called Environmental Protection Agency. But now they've been forced to pull the fuel out. They've got 103 million gallons out of that, the world's largest underground fuel storage facility, and it's all out. And so the good news is that that's a major loss. It's not even necessarily the fuel. It's the fact that the U.S. military, the U.S. empire has to give in to native indigenous action, because it is a native indigenous action. The U.S. military, the soldiers, they don't, you know, it's really sad. It's like some of the military wives who care about children. It's like, I guess military men don't care. I mean, it kind of seems like you don't care about your infants, your own children. You don't care about your own children. Never mind the children in Palestine or in Iraq or Afghanistan or indigenous children. They don't care about their own children. So that's pretty. That was really eye opening. And I think, you know, that but you know, it's good because every day they keep coming out, you know, and just showing who they are, and they can't keep it hidden anymore because the younger generations are just like, you know, with Palestine, right? You can print the U.S. You know, the U.S. the infinite money printers can print $50 trillion, right, and throw it into Twitter ads and Instagram and TikTok ads, but they can't, like a handful of, you know, Palestinian fighters making like, you know, Counter-Strike footage and like just videotaping, just recording what's happening, can't like the democratized information platforms cannot they're almost they themselves with the youth are countering the ability for capital to manufacture that narrative. And so I think that like you know, which bodes really well for the future, because that's basically what it is, right? It's because you need the money to buy off enough people, and the textbook writers and the news in order to convince everybody that the U.S.-led Western capitalist so-called rules-based democratic order, which is continued colonialism, blah, blah, that is the best thing. But if money can't buy, if money can't buy manipulated brains, then that starts to cause a disconnect there that I think is, anyway, this is getting way too theoretical. Not enough.
That's actually something important. Yeah. What you're saying there is actually something really important, like for Juche. It's something I try and fight against with like certain dogmatic communists. Like the real fight that we're in is for raising the revolutionary consciousness of people, right? Like every revolution that has occurred, it's not necessarily, as we know, Marx was wrong with his first take that revolution would break out where capitalism was most developed. History has proven that wrong, right? Lenin, he came a little bit closer when he said where the chain of imperialism is weakest. But then I think places like Korea and Vietnam show that no, actually, it's where the people have the most revolutionary enthusiasm. And even if imperialism is strong in that place, even if colonialism is strong, if the revolutionary forces and the revolutionary enthusiasm is developed high enough, victory can be won, right? And then another thing, like with Megan's game that you were talking about, something that reminded me of as well as another attitude that I see is the idea that first we'll get a socialist system and then we'll have land back, right? Like as if these settler parties will get the socialist system and then they'll grant Native people land back through, I know like Canada, one of the strategies for the Canadian Communist Party, for example, is what they call the House of Nations or something. And somehow this will lead to land back, right? But my thing is like land back is already happening in a multitude of different forms. And it's happening like all over the place. And through the struggle of land back, that's what allows us to then have the foundation we need to go on towards a socialist society, right? You can't build socialism here without first having an anti-colonial revolution.
Yeah, it's like very much when you kind of listen to a lot of these political ideologies, like around libertarianism and Rand's thingy, all that. It's like they first, like when you really start nailing down, like, well, this doesn't work. And they're like, no, first we need a utopia, and then it'll work. And you're like, well, then what's the point? Like, you're giving me nothing.
We gotta know how to build it.
Yeah. How do I get the IKEA shelf into my house? Like, don't tell me I can build this thing as long as I have it in my house if you're not going to tell me how to get it there. Yeah, I think that was part of why we picked that particular backstory for the land and the land back methodology, was because at the time it was literally the only thing we were seeing. It was the only way we were seeing land being given back was like, oh, it's too damaged. You take it now. And the only other thing I could see now, which I know why the Canadian government's dragging their feet on it, but like 90% of the land mass in Canada is uninhabited. There is nobody there. There isn't really any reason to not just immediately give back 90% of the land of Canada, and you could still maintain, the political system that is Canada. It's not like suddenly these areas are going to be like overwhelmed with new people. That's not what they're there for. But like, they're not letting go of them because of the potential. Because of the potential that they could sell it. Like, they are holding on to things. And that's how I know they're not serious about land back. Because if they were serious about land back, they would have no problem with handing over the swaths of areas that nobody is on, nobody is extracting from, and is not a provincial or federal park. But no, instead what they're doing is this whole weird piecemeal drip drop with, well, maybe we'll let you run our national parks. I'm like, what? Like, and that way it's like you're not even giving it back. You're just like, can you take over the administration for us, please?
It's like, here, we made this a historic site. Is that good enough?
Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's interesting. You bring up the giving the least desirable land. Like here in another thing happening in Hawaii, outside of the Red Hill, which is, I count that as a victory. Like well, obviously it is a victory, and hopefully we get more. But another one that we're entering into, another fight specifically on land that has been degraded. Well, all of Hawaii is degraded. From the colonial occupation. But Lahaina is the big focal point right now because obviously colonial land mismanagement, or they took the land out of native lands. They built the sugarcane and genocide, doles, pineapple. Well, not specifically there, but as part of a colonial agriculture for cash and money that long-term or even medium-term damaged the land. And as soon as they couldn't make money growing sugarcane, they gave it to all the giant colonial capitalist hotel industry that then has been directing water away from the native areas, like Lahaina. They used to be the Venice of the Pacific. It was the most lush green place. Now it's turned into a dry desert. And then the United States, so-called fake state of Hawaii, caused they cut the water off to that region. And so by the way, one thing a lot of people, I didn't realize this, but there have been 5 fires in that same area of Lahaina, like right around in that side of Maui, and basically at least one a year, a big one every 2 years. Hundreds of homes are destroyed like 2 or 3 years ago. It just didn't kill anyone. And so the Lahaina fire, the difference this past year is that the wind was blowing it in a different direction and it came really fast towards Lahaina. But the U.S. and the colonial occupations, Maui Power, Maui Water, these are like descendants of Alexander and Baldwin, which is, they're like United Fruit Company people. These are just like straight up old school colonial occupation. Hawaii is like, it's not even a state. It's just a straight up colony. And so this area was intentionally left dry, and then it burned. Everybody knew it was going to burn at some point or another. And when it did burn, they blamed the indigenous restoration, like actual land back, or we're taking, because our Hawaiian movement and Hawaiian, reforestation and restoring ahupua'a, which is our ways of land management, which, actually maintained land that fed and provided all the needs for the people for hundreds of years. And even after the colonial, even after Western contact, was still being preserved and was still feeding people. And so so the little bit of restoration that we Hawaiians have been able to get back into, they blame the Maui fires on native agriculture taking too much water. It's like we're using like maybe 1%, just a tiny fraction of the water that the giant U.S. operated hotels have stolen. And they basically built huge tunnels into mountains to redirect water away from native Hawaiian areas. And so, like, literally water wars. I mean, this is like a dystopian 90s movie. It's like Tank Girl, right? Or it's Immortan Joe, right? Turning on the water off and on. That's basically what the U.S. does in Hawaii. And so that area was burned, and then the police blockaded people in, so that people burned and died in the fires because of, I'm still on the side of this is just straight up genocide. Like in 1900, where the United States set fire to Chinatown, which is Hawaiian and Asian owned, and then they barricaded everybody in with armed white men and armed police to keep them inside of the burning conflagration. And so, anyways, but what we can definitely say is the United States has been against us there the whole way, lying about everything they're doing. Republican and Democrats trying to get elected, flying over there. And anyway, so the fight now with the land is that they're rebuilding now. They're starting to begin the process of rebuilding, and so there's a huge fight. There's several organizations like Aina Momona, and there's other Native Hawaiian, like Lahaina resident Maui run organizations that are trying to do everything possible to make sure that it is rebuilt, with traditional Hawaiian non-extractive, right, sustainable actual practices that doesn't lose the character that it had, like countless rare artifacts. It was basically basically the capital of Hawaii, Lahaina, and the capital, the museum there that has all these like priceless, like they're not, well, just they're unreplaceable artifacts that were just destroyed. It's kind of like when the United States bombs Palestinian Congress, blows up their university, destroys all their cultural centers, kidnaps their great poets and artists. Right, so it's the cultural eradication. So Lahaina was actually the United States eradicating more Hawaiian culture as well. That's another piece of that story. And so now the fight we're having now is to make sure that land gets restored. As the it's still dangerous out there because it's everything burned. We're talking about the greatest mass death from a wildfire in the history of the United States. It's not the United States, but the U.S. and its colonies. But I think a lot of Hawaiians are more radicalized by that because another thing is that the fires, because it's not in the news anymore, because Hawaiians aren't being killed by the United States in fires every day, but the fires are actually still burning. Like as we speak, there are fires. Hawaii is in a drought to a severe drought throughout the islands, and on Oahu, on Maui, there were 3 or 4 other fires burning the same day as the Lahaina fire. They just haven't killed anyone. So the United States is not talking about the fact that there is a serious crisis there, and that's obviously climate change, which is exacerbated by the basically manufactured by the colonial capitalist system, on top of their continued mismanagements. And so more and more Hawaiians are getting way more radicalized and restoring a lot more of the land. Molokai is one of the islands that's like the furthest along. There was a direct exchange between Palestine and Hawaii. Like Hawaiians from Molokai planted 300 olive trees in Palestine, and they also supported us on Mauna Kea in our actions. And they're like they're a bit further along because they have some of the most there's historical reasons why, but they are restoring the land and restoring the ecology. And I feel like I've been talking. I'll come back to this later on, I'm sure, but I'll hand it off to whoever wants to jump in. Or
Masterful segue.
Sorry, I didn't give you a good segue. I'm sorry.
I'm like, yes, I will definitely jump in on that. But I guess, yeah, to kind of come around, I guess I didn't answer the second part of your original question, which was, yeah, kind of like how it relates. And it actually was interesting at, being on this panel, talking about a lot of this stuff, and I kind of realized this beforehand, but it's like, we know on this side of the world that there is a playbook, that the playbook was written based off of the sort of how the settlers on Turtle Island figured out the most effective ways to get Indigenous people off the land. And that we know for a fact that Nazi Germany used the playbooks written by now what we consider Canadian politicians or upper Canadian politicians about how to best and effectively eliminate the Indian problem or the Native problem in their sort of like in their Holocaust. And now we're seeing Israel do the exact same thing. Like they're taking and of course America's helping them. They literally are handing them the playbook. They're probably I actually have this feeling like they're just telling them the bits as they come up of like, oh, do this, that worked for us, now try this, that worked for us. And what drives me nuts, and I even talked about this on the panel, was like, it doesn't work in the long run. It doesn't work. It's effective short term, and it's all short term thinking. And we know from what happened with right now, with everything's happening, with how we're talking about what happened with the residential schools and the reservation systems and the water boil advisories and everything, that like people are horrified because it's not information that's just sort of like related to the people who wanted that to happen. And we know from what happened during World War II that the majority of the world was horrified by that, and that people think genocide is bad, that like for all these doomers want to talk about how oh man, who the wretched mean. I'm like, no, people are not wretched, they are not mean, they're not cruel, people care more than not. People care, and they know that people care. That's why they don't want you to know, because if you know, well, okay, fine, there's nothing you can do about it. oh, that's not true. There's stuff you can do about it. Okay, fine. You know when there's stuff you can do about it, but it won't really matter in the long run. I'm like, yes, it will in the long run. And it's like it's a failing system. It's a failing plan. Not to say that it doesn't do harm. And I guess that's why I talked about, or why I kind of wanted to examine Inhale Agency. And I know I didn't go as sort of like raw as I could have. I'm not gonna lie, it was really hard even getting what we got done. So like there was a lot that got cut. But you know, that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the sort of like, I'm at my end, I'm in a trap of like colonization, colonialism. That's not, and that's why I thought I wanted to examine it, because it is so dangerous. It is so dangerous. Just because something is dying doesn't suddenly make it not a threat. And in fact, at this point, I'm seeing that it's just as much of a threat. It's just that every time it's sort of, it's just like it's another breath it's taking before it's over.
Yeah, for sure. There's actually a quote that I had. You made me think of it just now. I'm just looking for it right quick. But actually, I think I pretty much know it off by heart anyway. It's one that Fidel says about how, you know, we know that revolution will win in America and the rest of the world, but it's not for revolutionaries to sit with arms folded in the doorways of their houses waiting for the corpse of imperialism to pass by, right? Like, even though Marx, like, and Engels and Lenin, they made it clear that the downfall of capitalism is inevitable. Like, and again, this is something that I kind of try and, you know, I encounter all the time with Juche and trying to teach people Juche is like, really, we still are the ones who do that, right? We're the ones who go among people and like teach them these things and push them towards a better understanding. Because like you pointed out, like the whole like every colonization project and fascism itself is all based on the same settler colonialism, the master race versus everybody else, right? Like it's all based on this exact same thing. And fascism really in Germany, like Nazi Germany, was really born because of this like idea that emerged at that time that like people mixing together and people interracial couples will somehow create a white genocide. And this is something that helped compel the fascist movement to then say, well, we have to have a final solution, an industrialized solution, right? So it's still based on that same white colonialism, that same European colonialism. And I mean, even in Zionism itself, you can look at the very beginning of Zionism and see that they were saying, look, this is going to be a white European project. Don't worry. We're there to dispel native people. Like they say that outright, even before actually settling in Palestine, right? Even before stealing lands there.
And I love how you can really map the disconnect, like the ability of sort of the rise of fascism in Germany. You can really map closely with how they identified a problem, like that there's something wrong here. I'm constantly being hurt. I can't afford a home. I can't afford to feed my family. And then just, you know, so close to the answer, just like we see in America, so close to the answer that it's the fucking Habsburgs and the rich and the 1% that are doing this to them. And they're like, no, it must be the immigrants. And you're like, no, you were so close. You were so close. It's the rich asshole. It's that guy. And it was interesting to me that like how, like, because, you know, the Nazi Party did get support from the royal family in order to raise to power, but like they hated them. So they did understand in some ways that the royal families, which are basically one family, it was one giant family. And I don't know how many people like keep forgetting this, that the majority of the wars that have been happening and the majority of the colonialism that's been happening, it's been one fucking family. It's still the same fucking family. Like we have, like, talk about generational trauma. We are still being victimized. And one of the things that I've been starting to realize is that if you start framing what's happening globally as a toxic relationship, as a an abusive relationship, then all of a sudden a lot of stuff becomes a lot easier to talk about, because then instead of just being the state, you could be like the husband, the parent, you know, or the boyfriend or the girlfriend or the partner, the abusive partner. And like that is what we're in. And in a lot of ways, for so long, it's been the same people. So like we never left that relationship, I feel like.
Yeah, I love what you say there, because I mean, this is why I do, you know, defend places that have made a break with capitalism and imperialism, and like, for example, why I defend DPRK in Cuba, because these are countries that, you know, they're demonized and slandered, but at the end of the day, when you look at why, it's because they're literally doing the opposite of colonialism. They're doing the opposite of what these colonial powers are doing, and that's why they hate them, you know. That's why they're
Yeah, and we see, but we see that behavior in the microcosm of the abusive family, where there is the scapegoat, or there's the truth teller, or, you know, I've been learning a lot of these terms because I was like, this is very helpful. But, you know, the one who gets away, usually the one who's the black sheep of the family, or the one that gets dumped on all the time, they're villainized for being wrong. And a lot of times it's to like keep other people in the family from getting the wrong idea that like that you can just leave and be okay, and you will be okay. And of course, like we do see similar abusive behavior, narcissistic abusive behavior, where it's like, okay, you're awful. Oh no, they're still doing fine without me. Okay, I need them to know that they need me back. I'm going to try, you know, and then there's all the things they try, the tempting, the, oh, that didn't work, the stalking, that didn't work, the manipulation, the emotional manipulation, that doesn't work. And then, you know, it gets to the threats and you know, the actual violence. And then the only way a lot of these places have been able to kind of like keep that at bay is by, I don't know, there's a lot of ways they keep it at bay, but I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing now is that they just make it not worth it. Not worth it for these powers to bother with them. Which I think in a lot of ways is like frustrating, because then then they're just constantly in this defense mode, right? Of like, and I know it's really, it's what do they say? What are the great, a lot of the great indigenous like freedom fighters are like, just, you gotta be burrs. It's prickly and annoying, and you want them just constantly irritated until they're like, you know what, it's not worth it. But there's a lot of like collateral and human trauma that was not necessary in order to do that. And I think that's the thing I get frustrated by. It's like, why do people have to keep dying for this?
Yep. Why do people have to keep dying for? I mean, there are a lot of you know, it's unfortunate that there's something bring back to the current events with Palestine. You know, I don't know the exact. We don't have the exact count, because the U.S. and its pet, you know, new Holocaust, just using Auschwitz Holocaust Memorial to justify a Holocaust against Palestinians is now, which is what has sadly happened. I guess never again meant, actually maybe again. And so, but you know, over 10,000 at least. It's probably closer. Who knows exactly, right? Because they blew up the hospital that was keeping count in Al Shifa. And it's like, it is unfortunate that some people have to die some more for their global, you know, colonial capitalist imperialist system to try to keep on going. It's like, yeah, it is definitely very tragic. It's hard to watch. So a lot of people, you know, it's definitely, you're seeing everybody kind of like show who they are in this moment. I guess if there's not really, there can't really ever be a silver lining to innocent people just being killed, but like a lot of people are revealing who they are in a way that, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, was never possible. Where in the 20th century, you know, if this is the 1990s, right, you know, the United States would have a paid actress working, you know, with the neocons, like a little girl named Naira, who come out and say, they're throwing babies out of the incubators, and the babies are dying. 300 babies died in the hospital America, West, collective West, please save us in here in the Middle East. And then the United States would all cry, and then or fall for it, and then send all of their get hundreds of thousands of innocent people killed based upon a fake genocide, that's basically how it goes every single time. But this time, if a Israeli TikToker goes like, oh no, they're killing babies in hospitals, everybody's within 5 seconds, right? You've got like 500,000 young people around the world. Number one, there's the rest of the world can speak back to the West, which is the colonial capitalist, the monarchs and the monarchs and the Wall Street, also relatives of the monarchs and all of the international global capitalist class. They can pay the Israeli propagandist to do another Nehiyaw, but like it gets debunked like almost nearly instantly, and then a counter story with an actual baby. I mean, there was no infrastructure, right? And some of this is technological, but this is a new technological reality that we're in a dialectical sense. We're in a new reality where somebody with a Huawei phone, which can't be hacked, like Venezuela has, and also I'm sure the DPRK. I don't know which phones they're using, but they're probably using one. You can have a phone in an area where a U.S. imperial war is happening that can instantly get out a message, even with people like pedaling on a bicycle, powering. If Israel bombs like 3/4 of all the infrastructure, blows up all the power facilities, you can pedal a bicycle with like chain linked, 12 volt, car batteries, and get a signal out that can blow the lid off of any amount of propaganda that the West can throw, because and most people at this point, I think most of us here are Gen Z or millennial. We're approximately in that era, so we remember a time when the only game in town was CNN, the New York Times. Your choice was Coke and Pepsi, Fox or CNN or MSNBC. That's all you had. But like now, it's like people can hear people speaking from Palestine, and 8 billion people can basically almost in light speed share that information. And people the younger generation is even better. Like they say, like Gen Alpha is like even better than people that are like 30, 40 years old at sussing out falsified information. Even with AI generated fake pro-Israel protests with like Israelis with like 7 arms sticking out the window, right? Like it's like, oh, look at all these people are there for Israel, but everybody knows, right? Because there's 8 billion cameras out there that can show you 25 different angles. And so this is like, which is, it's kind of like, it's not just the technology that's changing it. It's also, of course, the people have to put that work in. But it's like a combination of those two things that is really starting to break the chokehold of, if I get more money doing global colonial, if I just keep on bloodletting, if I exhale imperial fire and like inhale all of the dead bodies and the smoke and all of the refugees in, and then make more soldiers and exhale more damage, and then suck in all the resources and the coltan, the copper and the gas. If I exhale an unsinkable aircraft carrier into the Middle East, like Biden and Robert Kennedy, relative of another war criminal, John Kennedy, if I exhale all this, right, unsinkable aircraft carrier into Israel, I'm gonna suck in 50% of the world's fossil fuel resources, and then I can like destroy more. But that, like, now when they breathe the fire, it's kind of like immediately there's a fire blowback. Like obviously there's always a news blowback. They say within 10 to 20 years, within 2 to 10, sometimes 20 years, the U.S. will release, oops, we did a genocide in Vietnam, but nobody cares by the time, right? Oops, oh yeah, everything we said about Iraq, that was a lie. Oh yeah, was the Syrian chemical weapons? Oh, maybe there weren't. Oh, I'm sorry, we never had any yellow cake uranium. That was just Colin Powell waving around his laundry detergent. But like now it's like instantly when they make that lie and they try to do that war, it's coming right back into it's more coming back into their face for a whole variety of reasons, including we're in like a, for 2,000 years, 1,800 of the last 2,000 years, there was a non-Western country that was the biggest economy in the world, and it's only been for about 100 years that has changed, and that's already reverted. So like in a global sense, the decolonization of Asia, the undoing of that colonial capitalist system of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and of course Turtle Island is a part of that. is swinging back in a way that is leaving the technological out of it, just the economic. It's swinging back in a way that is basically unstoppable, except for some Doctor Strangelove, let's just nuke everything. But short of that, the U.S. and the Western colonial capitalist world, the Euro visitors, right? The Queen and all of her, and all of the kings and queens who have sent all of their pissed off, starving peasants to come and build a white country in Turtle Island. Like their time is limited, and it is coming to. It's gonna come to an end some way or another. And anyways, like Meagan, like you said, it is dangerous because some people, like the business community, is like, well, I'm okay with doing business even if the world isn't a white Western world. Hillary Clinton is not okay. She said, I will not see a woman where China surpasses the United States. I will not live in a world where China is a greater power than the United States. I will not see my grandchildren live in that. So there's some unhinged people that are like, I will nuke this world, right? That's very dangerous. But anyways, I'll stop talking.
I love how they've been looking at China's policy of just like, let's do international relations by being a good neighbor, and they're like, it'll never work. And then it works, and they're like, they must be tricking them somehow. I'm like, yes, it's called being helpful. I do think in the next couple of years, international relations students are going to look at what China did and be like, that was a stroke of brilliance in terms of, like, yes, if you want to create international relations, stop. And again, taking this back to sort of like that abusive language that I was using, because if you look at how a lot of the sort of like colonial powers and imperial powers act, they very much feel like they always have to have you over a barrel before they'll work with you. Like, they do not want to meet with you as an equal. And it's to the point where it's like they go through such like lengths and turning themselves into knots, or just deciding they won't work with you rather than have you be on equal standing. Meanwhile, China's like, I don't care if we're equal or not. If you need this and you think these terms are fair, like, let's work together. I just want to work with you. Which is interesting, because if you think about healthy businesses or healthy communities, that's essentially how they do that sort of, I don't know you very well, we don't know each other very well, but I've got something you need, and maybe you've got something I need, but I can see that you need this more than I need it. And that actually comes back to the indigenous concept of wealth, right? Where it's like, you show off how wealthy you are by being like, I am so wealthy, I don't need this. You can have it. I know you need it, so I will give it to you. Do you need this land? Have it. Do you need this house? Have it. I am super wealthy. I can give this away and still have enough for myself and my family. And I think that's going to end up becoming the dominant political strategy going forward, international relations strategy going forward, is just showing off how wealthy your country is by first being like, look how healthy my country is. And then also being like, we have so much wealth, we're just giving it away. You know what? Don't worry about paying us back. I don't need it. I'm that well off. And I would love to see that, because you know where that comes from a place of security. And knowing that you do have enough, and you're not worried about not having enough, because that's what I see a lot in how countries talk to each other, people talk to each other. We hear about things and different groups on the internet is this lack. I don't have enough. You can't. If you have some, then that means I don't have enough. And we see it in so many areas. And I work in the arts, so I see it a lot in there. This, like, if you have some, that means I got nothing. And you're like, but like, the government literally prints money, right? Like, they can make up a number and just give it to the arts organizations. They don't, it's artificial. And we know, scarcity is artificial. And Indigenous people have always known that the only times scarcity has been real is when there's been these huge eco changes. When suddenly the ice left, or suddenly the water came, or suddenly the fires came. Those are times, or disease, like, those are times of legit scarcity. But we always had this understanding that You know, the earth and the land is here to provide. The plants will give, the animals will give. So, yeah, sure, maybe people don't have enough, but we're not the only persons on this planet, right? We have relatives in all the different areas that are super happy to help us because you know what? They're like, I have too much. I have too much. You can have some of it. And it frustrates me that that was such a revolutionary idea that I don't have super proof for this, but it's been suggested that a lot of these ideas is what spawned the Enlightenment. This idea that there is enough, you have enough, and that idea that like you don't have to act in lack, and that you make more interesting and better and healthier choices when you don't act from a place of lack.
I think like actually I think like the proof of that and the proof that we can do exactly, you know, what you mentioned is like again like in societies like DPRK and Cuba, where here you have countries that are blockaded, sanctioned like to the utmost degree, isolated by every means possible, and still able to provide like all their people free education, free healthcare, guaranteed housing, food guaranteed every month. Like in addition to your healthcare, your prescription is free. You know, like how can a country that is so sanctioned and so embargoed, and still, by the way, developing a military that can like thwart off like U.S. invasion? If it can do that, how can the richest countries in the world not do that? And I think a big reason, of course, why DPRK in Cuba is demonized is because of that example right there. It's like if the average people find out that that is the case and that people are like fed and they're guaranteed homes and stuff in there, then they will start to go, well, how come that isn't the case in our country? And that's where like I push them towards that left understanding of like we can change things, right? And it is by like revolutionaries and our allies like supporting indigenous organizations like Chunkaluda and other places that are fighting for land back, and that like through that process of liberation, that is what guarantees that this distribution is done in a fair way. Because like I said before, like our liberation is in the interest of everybody, right? It's in the interest of the broad masses, because we have a collectivist base of our ideas.
Yeah, I mean, just to come off of that, because just in case people here who are, as I said, I was trying to convince, speaking to non-natives about why you should support land back. How is that going to help? How is that going to help even non-native people? The Hawaii example, which is similar to the DPRK, Cuba, and there are many other historical examples. Even Libya had universal free college, granted free new apartments for like young couples. It's just similar. It's a similar process to kind of, as Megan alluded to, the black sheep that gets away. It happens as countries under an abusive colonial capitalist relationship. There have been over the centuries several of these, and Hawaii is one of them. In the 1800s, I go off on this frequently, but just specifically on like the quality of the healthcare. Hawaii created the in the modern era, Hawaii created the world's first universal healthcare system in 1859 with Emma Kaleleo Nalani Na'ea Rook was one of the leaders in Hawaii who went on foot to raise money for a absolutely free healthcare system, the Queen's medical system that was established. So actually, because we brought up Marx, this was 8 years before Das Kapital was even published, 1859, and this system was backed by Hawaii, which had the highest literacy rate, 98%, by far the highest literacy rate in the world. It surpassed every European country. Speaking of the Queen, whose family has abused the planet for so many centuries, the Queen, Britain, Germany, and France were all behind Hawaii. They said that at a Paris symposium in 1869, where they had to exclaim, based upon all these publications in science, engineering, Hawaii had the world's first renewable powered, not just powered, renewable powered city. Hawaiian leaders who all had, it's kind of like the Chinese government who actually has the top tech and engineers, actual experts in things, rather than psychopathic performers like Biden and Trump and every president. there were actual technologists that went to meet Thomas Edison, Kalakaua, and brought back the electrification technology and actually implemented it. And so waterfall spun turbines under a nationalized, like similar to DPRK in Cuba, a nationalized non-for-profit renewable powered electrical grid powered 800 plus Honolulu city lights. And there were also projects on other islands, Big Island, Kauai, etc. And it was a free electrical program, free healthcare system. There was basically zero homelessness. There was world-class mass transit, like the high-speed rail that the U.S. can't get done, that some other countries are able to get done because they're operating in a similar way. Hawaii had a mass transit of ferries, trolleys, and you could take a ferry from a neighbor island like Hawaii to Oahu, and then catch a train and then take a trolley, to Honolulu, and then take one back for basically a negligible fee. Well, I mean, maybe they just got lucky. No, and the United States needed Hawaii because they had to be civilized. Well, the United States coup, to really hammer that home, it was the colonial capitalist system that is directly to blame for the ending of all of that, right? Any American, when I share this, Americans like, oh my God, I would love to live in Hawaii in 1800s. They're like, I have to pay like 2/3 of my income just to not die from basic cancer. Or if I take a hospital trip, I become homeless, right? So like in Hawaii in 1800s, what happened was the United States, there was plotted a coup, and it was about 9 white capitalist men, and they had an armed right-wing militia called the Armed White. It was an armed white men group of rifle bearers who, backed by the United States Empire. Similar stories all throughout Central America, African, and people all over the Middle East who have ever been cooed by the United States. They know this story, but this was one of the early ones for the United States, and they supported a coup. The Hawaiian Electric Company specifically outlined that they were upset that the Hawaiian government didn't allow them to make as much profit as possible, right? And was forcing prices down to basically it's basically doing what advanced socialist countries that have gotten out more or less do today, right? And so they asked the United States military to send that boat. After the coup, they jacked the price of electricity. Hawaii is the highest electricity cost in the so-called United States today. They got rid of all the renewable hydro turbines. This is huge waterfall turbines. It's Hawaii. I know Canada, they have Niagara Falls, right? Hawaii has waterfalls everywhere, right? But they're not used to make power because that didn't the white capitalist oligarchs wanted to use fossil fuels specifically so they could control the income, and it just made better sense for them specifically. Didn't make good sense for the environment. It didn't make good sense for the cost for the average person, but it made sense for them and their profit. And the U.S. military, obviously, with Dillingham, who also directly colluded to build, he dredged Waikiki, Waikiki means the jumping water for people who don't know, right? Waikiki is not just a place where 51st dates and Elvis sails around and then commodifies Hawaiian culture for settler colonial benefit, like Israelis showing up in Palestine to do a rave and steal Palestinian land. Hawaii is basically very much Israel, but like less direct bombing and killing, right? So white people show up here, take a vacation, and then stay there forever, and they destroy the native culture and be genocidal, and then use us as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Israel is the unsinkable aircraft carrier for U.S. imperial interests, and Hawaii is that for it's the head of the Indo-Pacific Command. It's like, right, the number one enemy, of course, being China. But so all of that plot though, and it was based upon destroying the universal healthcare system, which the United States forcefully defunded. That instituted the U.S. I call it the universal death care and universal wealth extraction system that passes for U.S. healthcare. That's the most expensive in the world. It doesn't work. And then they replaced the mass transit with as many cars as they possibly could. They replaced all those trains and all those trolleys. They just buried that. They just buried it all, right? Destroyed it all. So like from top to bottom, it's like if Hawaii had just continued on, Americans, even if because again, not land back, as we said, doesn't mean if you're white, you have to like go to Europe. That's not what that means, right? Americans could have lived, and there were white people, there were black citizens, there were Asian full citizens like Sun Yat-sen, who led revolution in China and was the forerunner that came before Mao. He was actually took the model of Hawaii as a model for for the future of China. And because Hawaii was this is what it's like. Well, as Meagan said, when you work from a place of there is abundance, right? We don't need to hoard, right? We people need houses, people need electricity, so they get it. It's not like, right? And whereas you can, like, it was so stark where the Western the doles, the plantation owners, the U.S. empire, the military, their whole attitude was, we have to take and control this and crush everybody here so that we can take and control the rest of the world. Because at the end of the day, they knew that they were insecure, and they knew that they were insecure in their own doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and quintupled down crimes, and they knew that like today, the U.S. can't say Hawaii, remove the military bases from Hawaii. The U.S. can't say free Hawaii, even though they've technically admitted the fact that it's a legal occupation. The United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights has even said it's a legal occupation of fraudulent annexation. The U.S. has no jurisdiction in Hawaii. It's like China saying, it's like China having a military base and China governing California. That's the level of legitimacy the U.S. Government has in Hawaii, but they can't admit that, right? Because if they don't want to admit that they can't pull back from Israel. Part of the reason why they don't want to is because they have to admit that Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and all the 800 military bases, these are all really violations of international law. And so but anyway, long story short is, if the United States copied the Hawaiian, you can't copy it directly. It's like socialism with Hawaiian characteristics doesn't necessarily work in Turtle Island. But if that had remained in place, life would have been so much better for every American. Or even if if America took half the ideas that Hawaii already was implementing, life would have been so much better for the vast majority of Americans. And I'll end on this just to shout out Gaza. Right, I think many people have learned. If you don't know, Gaza is the word gauze, right, comes from Gaza, right? It was the first. As far as I know, the first universal healthcare system outside of, sure there's something similar in indigenous communities, but the first like formal large-scale universal healthcare system was in fact the Bimiristan of the people in the Arab world, like 800 years ago, where they gave free healthcare to everyone, no matter they were Muslim, no matter they were Jewish or Christian, men, women, rich, poor. They're actually moving hospitals that went all around, West Asia and North Africa, wherever they were working, and they were mandated to give away healthcare to everyone. And Gaza is, the Europeans took the technology that the Arabs invented, right, to heal. Anytime you get wrapped in gauze, you're using Arab technology, right? And that's, as Gaza's wounds are being opened up and bleeding everywhere, everyone in the West is healing their wounds with Arab technology and trying to bury that fact. But anyway, so shout out to that, the world's first universal healthcare system there. And yeah.
Something you mentioned too just reminded me that I wanted to say, like, I think we need to, you were saying earlier about Israeli propaganda, but I think we need to push back on the other side of Israeli propaganda, where we know they barely release any of their own casualties in order to like minimize the actual strength of resistance that's going on, right? Like, I'm of course appalled and disturbed by the tragedy that's going on, but at the same time, on the other side of it, I'm also like inspired by the fight that the resistance is putting up. And when you actually see like, videos on the ground of them hitting like these APCs and stuff like that, there's more troops in that than Israel has released the number of casualties, like just in one of those APCs. So like, I just don't want like people, when you see all this, yes, it's very discouraging, it's very heartbreaking, but at the same time, don't let it like lead you down a path of like defeatism, right? Realize that the resistance is fighting a struggle, and Israel can kill a lot of people, but my position is like, it can never win this war, right? It can never win this genocide. It can kill a lot of people and they can level buildings and try and come in, but those fighters are still there. They still know the area better. They know the tunnels better. And like, Israel knows this and knows how frightened they are, which is why they don't properly support their armor, which is how resistance fighters are able to like approach it and actually put things right on the armor and things like this. And I mean it's the same kind of thing all over the place, right? And then the other thing that struck me that you just mentioned was about how, you know, all these native examples of doing like a better organization of society. Well, like here, the Wabanaki Confederacy was a confederacy of multiple nations who really came together, and everybody had a say in matters that affected all the nations that were there, and the majority was sort of accepted by all. You know, it's very similar to something someone later would come to call democratic centralism. You know, it was this way that we were able to organize with each other and make sure we all respected each other's rules and each other's hunting grounds and everything else, and make sure that we were sharing the resources evenly as a result.
Yeah, I think something I was thinking as you were talking about, you know, we've been seeing this change, and we're seeing people talk, and I think about where's this shift coming from, and I think it's coming out of, as bad as this sounds, a lot of the stuff that, maybe it's not bad, but a lot of the stuff that came out of the 80s and 90s that was like, hey, spousal abuse is a real thing. Child abuse in the home is a real thing. It doesn't just happen in, like, you know, with the quote unquote the poors, because, you know, the demonization of like, oh, that doesn't happen in good suburban areas. But the fact that, like, no, this is a real thing. The fact that, you know, the women's movement actually started to see some real gains in the 80s. Like, my grandmother couldn't have a bank account until the 80s. Until the 70s on her own. And my mom never really knew that world. But it is interesting how there's that huge shift in the 80s, 90s with that. This isn't okay. This behavior's not okay. You can't infantile an entire 50% of your population that are adults. And then now what we're seeing is sort of like, I think what people are starting to call the great estrangement. And I don't know if you've been following this kind of stuff. I do, because this is happening to me. And like, in that I am becoming estranged from my family due to like, a history of abuse. And that a lot of young people are saying no. And not just young people, older people too. Like, you know, people who are in their 60s and still have living parents who were abusive to them are starting to say no. And that is the one thing that I have noticed is the big shift globally, is it is really easy to think of other people as nothing, as disposable, as, you know, not deserving, when you yourself don't think of yourself really, truly as worthy, deserving. And you know, we can see a lot of how there's the push off into the afterlife in a lot of religions, especially Christian religions, that, well, you don't have to respect yourself in this life as a human being, because your great reward will be coming after, you know, in this other place. And so you can treat yourself like a tool. And in a lot of, you know, these Christian sects, you know, you're told that you're born with sin, that you are never innocent, you are never deserving, you have to constantly work at this. And it's just so antithetical to, and the opposite of, you know, every indigenous culture that I've ever run into, which is saying that you are a person. You are a person. And these other relations of ours, these trees, these rocks, these birds, these fish, these are also persons, people. And they are all deserving inherently of the respect of being a living creature. You also deserve that. And we're seeing that shift in the micro. And that's the interesting thing to me, because we still have this concept in this world that things come from the top down. But we know that's not really true. Things come from the bottom up. And so why I really think there's this shift like, yes, all this work that we've been doing around educating people and around, talking about the residential systems and all this kind of stuff, and the process of what happened is very good and healing. But I think really what happened was we started saying children are people, women are people, blacks are people, Asians are people. Now we're starting to say trees are people, plants are people, animals are people, and they are all deserving of respect and voting rights, and to be able to be held up as things that know themselves and can speak for themselves and can advocate for themselves. And now I'm seeing that in the micro is what creates this giant global shift. So really, if you're like, I'm not comfortable going to protests and I'm not comfortable doing all this other things or speaking out, you know what you can do? You can stand up to abuse in your family and in your life and in your relationships. You can do that. That is the one thing I think everybody should do if there's nothing else in the world that they feel comfortable doing, is first believe that you are inherently deserving of all personhood rights, and that you are not a thing and you are not a tool. You're not there for your boss's pleasure, and you're not there for your partner's pleasure. You are there because you are alive. And so, yeah, that's the one thing I think we can do first, if nothing else is available to you, because I do know people who are afraid, right? It's scary. You see, and that's part of the tactics, right? That they threaten your job, they threaten your livelihood, they threaten the things that you care about, the very few comforts you have left in your life. They'll take it away from you. They threaten that. So it is hard to stand up. But, I think doing that shift in your personal life, and this is the interesting thing to me, that's the stuff they don't care about. That's the stuff they're not going to threaten you for. Oh, you want to leave your abusive partner? Sure, that's great. Buy this lipstick. You want to stand up to your abusive parents? That's great. Buy these chocolates. They don't care. And it's so funny that they don't care, because that's the most dangerous thing you can do, is treat yourself with respect. Real respect.
Yeah, I think that's actually important, really important what you just said, and something also that really like spoke to me about Juche was the way, like, to quote Kim Jong Il, how he says, the history of human society is the history of the struggle of the popular masses to defend and realize independence, and like all class struggle, every struggle that has existed is literally the result of this struggle of the masses to realize and like maintain their independence. And at the same time, like, we have to realize that people, like you're saying, and humans are precious, and that humans in particular have a certain ability to transform the world around them, and therefore they have a certain responsibility to ensure that we're not transforming the world in a harmful way, right? Like, we have to make sure that we use that responsibility and this transformative power that we have as a species in order to like maintain a healthy environment for all the different persons of the earth, like you were just saying, right? And this to me is why Juche is such an important thing, because I think it, with many, especially white people, they study Marxism, Leninism, and they sort of get lost in this dogmatic, like, economistic thing, like, and they don't see the other aspects of it, where it's really about liberation. The core of it is really about liberating us from our oppression of human by human, right? And therefore allowing humanity to once again be independent in their own development, as we were like before colonization came about, right? I would say, like, First Nation society pre-colonization, they had this, right? Like, they had an independence that was collective, and what was forced upon us from settler society was a society that was against that idea. And we've sort of seen the outgrowth of that, and also on the other side of the coin, the struggle against that.
Yeah, definitely, like the independence. Self-determination is a word that has been used by if the UN in the international political sense, like, actually, like, as you both have been saying, like, if like there was a worldwide respect for the personhood of all people, of all humans, and also of course of nature, which humans also rely on from a Native Hawaiian perspective, right? It's like Aina is your mother, and you don't exist without your mother. Your mother gave birth to you, and also your mother feeds you and sustains you, and without that you have nothing. And so a failure to respect your mother, that is the earth, the land. The word Aina means that which feeds and that which sustains, is a failure to exist ultimately, because you will no longer be around. And that's kind of like part of what's happening with the climate change and the disasters that we're seeing, right? And so like if kind of like if there was like international bodies, like, Silver Spook, when will you be happy? When will you stop, getting over here and like attacking, going after the United States every time? It's like, if it doesn't really matter like what the place or the organization or the Westphalian state. I mean, these things, who knows what's going to happen to them, but if all of our people collectively were respected around cultural lines, so meaning like the United States starts punishing Hawaiians for speaking Hawaiian in classrooms, it's literally continuing to suppress language. They're still doing that in 2023. They don't publish stories about it, but they keep doing it. If we stop being mass incarcerated, if the richest country in the world could provide everybody's basic needs the way that some do, like obviously North Korea, Cuba are too, among others, right? If they, no human individual or aggregation is perfect, because we're flawed, but if they at least had some, like if they at least were reasonably successful or reasonably carrying out, right, the respect for all people and also our relatives in the environment, then we wouldn't be having these problems. But the problem is that, like, at a systemic level, right, we are being denied our rights, right? Not just Lahaina. Before that, we've 50 every decade, 10% of Hawaiians are forced out of Hawaii, just as one example, right? Now hopefully the United States, I mean, maybe this will collapse within the next 2 years, so that won't happen. But I mean, at the current rate, they continue to violate even their own, right, what they signed, the UN Charter. They violate the Geneva Convention. Obviously, they're violating that all over the front page, incontrovertibly, in Palestine, right? But even in their own country, they're violating that. Even to non-native people, that basic needs are not being met all over the United States. 70 million people are malnourished on, at least at some point in the year in the United States. They can't afford healthcare. All the basic needs, the infrastructure is collapsing, the environment's collapsing. Just one more to kind of like, I love, the U.S. should be shamed, and it's like an abuser needs to have a collection of all the receipts brought before the public, so that their reputation, they're not canceled, so that their reputation is accurately reflected amongst the wider public, right? And so the United States has desertified 30% of its entire forests and green and plants and forested areas. China has increased over the last 100 years 10%. They've reforested 10%, right? Just from the human to non-human relative angle, right? Despite industrializing and providing for people, they still managed to, this is things that we're trying to do. That's why I even said, I'm talking to my fellow Native Hawaiians, like, we should, like, can we get, like, the Chinese have reforested like this, like millions and millions and millions of square feet with this process, and like the process that they use, they have like this crosshatch. They have like, so it's not that different from a lot of pluricrop agriculture from many different places, but the undesertification or the undoing of ecological and green space damage is a very similar process to the types of processes that we are using in Hawaii. Not identical, right? But to how we are restoring desertified land, where the U.S. military, the Air Force, like you were saying earlier, bombed, like, they bombed and destroyed like hundreds of acres, and like, to reclaim that land, we're doing similar things, where you just like, by planting in certain ways, and then you bring water and moisture to an area, and then that aggregates more water and moisture. You bring like a more diverse crop that are of a more diverse family, right, of plants and into an area that tend to lead to regenerative cycles, right? and these are, you know, anyway, so like I said, you know, if the United States was capable of not bombing our entire islands into the Stone Age, right? I see helicopters flying over my house, military choppers flying over my house. If they bomb 30 miles from where I stream, you know, it's like if they could stop destroying everything somehow, right? Collectively, and stop poisoning the water at Red Hill, and then stop lying about it. The poisoning is one thing, that's destroying the aquifer, and that's, you know, horrible. Then lying about it, and also the justice, right? If there could just be, if the U.S. had something other than an organized crime enabling tool called the Supreme Court and all the U.S. court system, that's mostly what it does, right? They had an actual justice system, right, that actually like didn't mass incarcerate 2.5 million disproportionately Black and brown and indigenous people. Hawaiians are 4 times more likely to go to prison. We're the most likely to go to prison in the whole United States. So if they could like, I don't know how, right? It's like difficult path to how we get there, but like it's, you know, it's like coming back to that thing of like at all levels respecting all people, respecting society from one society to the other, right? Hawaiian is not worse than English, right? Palestinian is not language. Their language is not a lesser language than Israeli. Israelis are not greater, right? Europeans are not greater than non-Europeans. And if they could, if, you know, somehow we could get to a point where they, you know, are actually following through on even they know these things, right? Because they've signed onto these agreements, but they can't. The collective Western colonial capitalist world has not gotten to that place yet. But if they could, then we would, you know, I I said, like that's like part of the land back process. Like it's not, if you just if a 300 acres gets given to Hawaiians and like, okay, well there you go, done. That's not you know, that's not it. And so I think that like until they do that, it's kind of like the players in the world who are fulfilling those responsibilities, like, you know, you're saying we have enough, so Cuba, here, we'll forgive like multi-billions of loans. Like Africa, you don't have enough, but China, we have enough. Have $26 billion worth of loans forgiven and have free infrastructure, right? Students in China, but fun fact, if you want to go to college, it's $700 to go to the best university in the world. It's Tsinghua University. It's like if you go to university, you know, it's $94,000 at Pennsylvania College, and you're going to be paying through the nose for the next century your student debt. So I'm just saying, if you want to get something done, so the U.S. has to, the West has to offer a better, a more collectively and individually non-abusive deal to everyone, because also the rest of the world, the rest of the global majority, as it's often called, are not going to wait. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, like, if you have an abusive boyfriend, right, as long as there's only other abusive boyfriends on the market, right? If you go on Tinder and like every one of these guys is like beating and it's just like horrible, toxic, you know, horrible person. But if there's only abusive boyfriends, like you can go with NATO or you can go with the US, you can go with France or you can go with Britain. But if you have another option now, people are gonna be jumping ship. Anyway, I'm Megan, I saw you got to go early, so you can respond to that because I directly addressed your abusive relationship metaphor.
I'm just gonna use it for everything now. I think it's funny because, like, I tell you, what was it? Was it just like before the pandemic or during the pandemic when people were like, everything's abusive these days, as sort of a like, no, it's not, and you guys are being super special snowflakes, and the response was just, yeah, because it is. Everything that people are calling out as abusive, the majority of it is abusive. And even if it's not, it's also like, we're so traumatized by the abuse we did experience that even if it's just mildly not good, or it's somebody's trigger hitting your own trigger, it's still like identifying correctly that like this is not a good interaction that's happening right now. So I do like that. Yeah, I feel like I want to run this metaphor into the ground. I think we should start using it at like the UN and stuff, and just be like, US, you're being really abusive right now, and I think I just need some like space. So like.
Exactly.
I mean, I might be like a bit of extreme maybe, but like I honestly think like the way we're gonna achieve exactly what you're talking about is exactly like I said, through the dismantling of the current settler colonial system, which which means like the US and Canada as we know it, basically doesn't exist through the process of land back, at least not as we know it today.
Yeah.
I think that's how we get there. And there's this great quote by like Kim Il Sung, where he really puts it out like the way that socialism develops is, first you have the democratic revolution and then you can expect to build socialism. And I think, of course, the democratic revolution here means the liberation of First Nations, which implies to me the dismantling of the settler colonial state itself. It's like in Palestine, like we know the two-state solution is not actually a real solution, because you can't have two states where one state is a genocidal state, right? The actual solution is to have an indigenous Palestinian-led state that welcomes everybody, like existed, essentially like what existed before colonization there.
Also, no settler state is going to want that either. Like Canada, that was the two state thing that was suggested in Canada first. And no, it's like nobody wants that. The only people who want that are people who are like, can we just stop fighting? I don't want to hear about it anymore. I had a really hard day. Like that, it's that grandparent, right? Who's just like, can we, good vibes only, dude. Good vibes only is the only one who suggests the two-state solution. And you can just call them that.
And Mi'kmaq people didn't fall for that, by the way. Like way back in 1749, when they declared war on them trying to bring a treaty, the English, like we recognized it right away. Like, yeah, some nations did, but Mi'kmaq people were like, no, this we know what the hell this is all about, and literally went to a years-long war against the English at that time. We're one of the earliest to do so.
Yeah, and in the end, it's like it doesn't actually achieve anything. It just delays the inevitable, which is that essentially the inevitable is the ousting of the settler state. That is the inevitable. That is how this is all going to end. It's not going to go any other way. How we get there, that's for the crystal ball, right? Like that's so many different ways we can get there. I have a pretty good idea of how we're going to get there. I'd like it to have a little less human misery involved. But I can see also like how things within like the city that I live in are replicating these larger problems. Like, so in Ontario, we had the way the province power versus the state national power is a little like messed up. But essentially, in order to destabilize and restrict the power of the municipal, which was actually quite powerful. So for a while in Ontario, the most power was held by the cities or the towns. So they could dictate, who could build where, infrastructure, how the majority of the taxes, which came from sort of your property taxes, where that went, because that's the pie, right? That's the juicy pie that all the politicians want their hands on, is the property taxes, because it's so much. It's way more than they get from income tax, especially because they don't tax the income of the rich. So they were like, well, how do we get our hands on this? And also, these towns and cities are getting in our way of doing what essentially happened to Hawaii, like, which is we want that land. We don't want you to have renewable stuff. We don't want you to make walkable cities, because our buddies want, to have you buy their cars, and we want to have our developer bros eat up prime greenbelt land that is protected. And also, most people don't know this, but like, Ontario is a weird spot geologically. Like, we're technically a desert that got very green very fast, but it's very shallow. So the interesting thing about Ontario is if you dig down not even an entire shovel, it's sand. You hit sand. And this entire area was cultivated with cedar trees in order to offset that, because cedars will just grow in pretty much anything, and they drop a lot of leaves, and they build up a really thick, rich loam on top. We also have tons of water. Lots of water comes through this. We're probably the five-fingered lakes. There's probably more water underneath. It's probably not actually five fingers. It's probably just the pools of a larger lake that we're getting to see. So, water and the protection of the water and anything that could get in the water is really important in Ontario. And a lot of the cities, whether knowingly or not, were doing a lot of things to protect that. Mostly, I think it was a lot of not in my backyard, but stopped clock works at least twice a day kind of thing. But then the sort of the provincial powers, because they wanted access to that, those things, they did amalgamation. And so amalgamation basically said, you're not this city, this township, you're now one mega city. And so now you have a centralized city council, and that city council, that mayor does not live near you. Like, one of the largest problems in Ontario is the fact that in Northern Ontario, especially in the rural areas where all the farmers are, is you will have one mayor and one city council for 5 towns. And that's like, oh, that's not a lot. Each town is about a half-hour drive from each other and is about an hour drive across. So that's a huge amount of space. And, there's no way they could know what everybody needs. And so that's continuing. We're getting these mega cities, and the entire point of the mega city is to reduce the power of the voice of the people who live in the space.
Yeah, they did the same here with Halifax as well.
If I ever run for politics, which I probably won't because that's a fool's errand, be like, run on a de-amalgamation platform. Like, they'll be like, you can't do that as a mayor. I'm like, watch me.
Yeah, but anyways, before, I know, Meagan, you gotta go soon, so I just wanted to, before I forget, I should probably ask, well, that's actually 2 things. I remember you maybe already addressed that, but one was you wanted to talk about native capitalism at some point, but the other thing was I wanted to ask, like, how the game just in the industry sense is going with, like, the whole agency and other projects that you might be working on. So yeah, anyways, either one of those 2 things, but just wanted to make sure I threw that in there at some point.
You want me to talk about the topic that I can rant about for 2 hours in like 5 minutes?
Okay, well, that's up to you. I
think we
condense.
I mean, the problem with Indigenous capitalism is the problem with capitalism, but I think to like really dig into it. But essentially, it's like problems we've seen with any group where it's like it's really easy to find somebody that supports anything from any group. But just like what was kind of happening in the States with Black excellence is starting to happen in Indigenous communities within quote unquote Indigenous excellence, where if you just play the game, if you just get really good at the game, you'll win, and then you can save your people. And it's so gross because we know it doesn't work. And it's really funny how most of the communities that I interact with hate these people. They're like, no, I'm not interested in your high power player games in Toronto. I just want to get my fish.
Yeah. Or if you want to say, like, how is the
things...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just like how things are going with the game. I mean, I'm still recovering from burnout. Video game design, not even once. It's been a hard road because I started this in like 2017, but I really started it before that, and it just like I don't know. I think maybe one day I'll talk about it, but like it's like anything you can imagine could go wrong. Can you like add like 20%, 28% more drama, and like so it wouldn't even happen in a soap opera level of, oh my god, that's what happened to me. Like it was like I was just waiting some days, like, are we gonna get an earthquake, and will my computer disappear into a crevice in the earth because it was going that direction? But then every time something really bad happened, something really good would happen. Somebody would step forward and be like, hey, we can take over that, or we'd get a grant, or we'd win a prize. So yeah, definitely things, that was rough. It was a very difficult pregnancy is how my one friend described it.
Well, a good thing is at least it got finished. You got it done in less time than me, because I also started in 2017, so not quite done. with Nehiyaw too, but I'm nearly done. Very, very, very close. Yeah, but I can definitely relate to everything you just said. Some days I'm like, I wish I was done with this so I could work on the 7 other things I have ideas for. But gotta get this done. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, in some ways I do wish I could have spent more time with the writing. I wish I could have, a lot of the stuff that we wanted to put in, we had to cut. I do wish we could have taken more time, but in some ways, like, I am very glad that it's done. Because yeah, like you said, like now I can kind of think about the 7 million other things I want to do, but also I really needed to stop and heal. I was, I think one of the things people don't talk about with burnout, and we're not talking about what's going on right now, is just the rage, like the just uncontrollable rage you feel because you've just exhausted every part of you. Like you've exhausted your spiritual, mental, emotional, and your physical. Like it's you're done. You're a lit, burnt matchstick. And yeah, coming back through the healing, it's like it is really hard to get back out there. And it's also very difficult to talk to people because we are in this space where, like, I mean, everyone's angry right now, right? Shit's fucked. So like everybody is angry, and even if you are relatively well off, or you're in a good situation, or you know you have a life that you're very grateful for, you will feel that rage. And I'm not an angry person, so having that rage and not knowing how to process it, because there's no space to process it, because there is no safe space in our world right now to process it. That's been a learning experience. I don't know how some of my peers jump straight into games. Probably it's a way of like spiritually bypassing or emotionally bypassing what they've gone through with their development. So I think it's just one of the things that I'm very grateful for is I've been given space to heal. And so I'm very much hoping the next couple of games that I'm able to make are going to benefit from that space that I took. But in the long run, what I hope happens is that I'm making games for 25 years rather than trying to get through a bunch of stuff in 10 years and then never wanting to talk to anybody about games ever again. Because I love making games. And so I don't want to lose that.
Well, that's good to hear that, because I'm definitely hoping to keep the Silver Spook games and Silver Spook Cooperative as a whole going, trying to train the kids. They don't have to if they don't want to, but the Silver Spook, at the Silver Spook non-capitalist anti-imperialist cooperative. Fun fact: you can't say that if you work for EA or Activision or any of the big companies. So I recommend, and also if you work for Unity, if they have any jobs left, that they haven't mass fired everybody and turned everyone into an AI cog, you gotta decolonization requires decapitalismization as quickly as you can. Of course, that doesn't mean that we're out of it, but part of that also enables us to, we can make I can make games about anything. I can make games where you just go around and kill American imperialists, like in I was thinking about making Decolonizers Palestine. I'm like reliving like playing Counter-Strike in 2000, but I want to play like the opposite, right? Where the terrorists are the imperialists showing up in other people's countries and killing the children. But you if I had enough time, I would make a retro FPS where you just play the liberation fighters of the world. But I don't have time to do that. But you can't do that. You can't do that if you're not if you're bound, like so many university professors, so many Hollywood stars, they have to be silent on Palestine. They can't do what they want. And so that's important. I think that's important. And then also we can pass this on to our kids. Today was sweet potato harvest day, so I'm making a video about that. We have a giant sweet potato, and we also harvested sugarcane. The kids got to try sugarcane grown from the land-backed Silver Spook former lawn. That's not a lawn anymore. Now it just grows sugarcane and coconuts and sweet potatoes. That's all it grows. And so but we couldn't do that if we were beholden to the $3,000 rent of Honolulu, a amalgamated mega city one of so-called state of Hawaii. If we were stuck there, then we wouldn't be able to do that. So long story short, I do hope that you continue to do that and share share the enthusiasm and don't burn out. I'm looking forward to whatever comes out next. I'll be sure to play it again on my stream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess before I leave, I guess my own little like I have to do a capitalism. If you want to, there's the Steam Awards on Steam right now. I don't know, it's silly, but somebody pointed out that even if you don't have the game and you have a Steam account, you can still nominate games. So if people want to nominate us for like best visual award or best thing to chill out with, we would appreciate that. It's just nice to like I feel like every little win is nice when people are just like, I liked your game, and I get a little comment that's, oh my god, it makes my heart feel so big. It's so great. So yeah. Oh well, thank you so much for having me. I really love being on your streams. It's so fun. It was really nice meeting you, Larry.
It's nice meeting you as well. I know my next game purchase.
It's only 3 hours. You'll finish it.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you.
Thanks, Megan. See you around.
Bye.
And yeah. So it's been 2 hours. So you know, if you gotta go or anything, you know, you let me know. Larry, are you planning to stream today or?
Oh no, I'm not streaming tonight. I'm just hanging out, so it's totally balls in your core, whatever you feel like doing.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll just like hang out a little longer. Then I should probably I gotta take a break here. But yeah, just you know, I was just a little bit curious, or I was curious about like the you know, Mi'kmaq. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, Mi'kmaq, or I mean, some people say Micmac, but Mi'kmaq is more, I guess, appropriate.
Oh, okay, Mi'kmaq. Oh, okay. Yeah, because that's in the. Is that in that's the east side of the continent?
Yeah, far east, like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia.
Oh yeah. I was just curious because I believe that was where there was that whole incident with the lobsters and those settlers.
Yep, that was a very recent incident that went on here where settlers decided they were going to attack Mi'kmaq fishermen for fishing in similar areas to them. And I mean, the people who were attacking Mi'kmaq fishermen are in gigantic commercial fucking boats, you know, like huge trawlers and shit. Most of the Mi'kmaq fishermen are in little cabin cruisers, right? Like fishing with little nets or with like a little tiny trawl net at best sometimes. And yeah, they were literally destroying our catches. Like anything that was brought on shore, they would destroy it. Police would show up and not do anything. They would just stand there and like watch all of the catch be destroyed and everything else. Just like stand by and supervise, basically make sure like Mi'kmaq people aren't fighting back, right? If I had to guess, is what the police were there to do. And as I mentioned before, like the media the whole time pretty much spun it in a way that, as far as I could tell, the mainstream in a way that demonized Mi'kmaq people struggling against this, right? And it's why I'm constantly like trying to encourage like, you know, my settler allies, like if you want to contribute, show up to like protests and demonstrations like this, because you can lend a sort of like legitimacy that the mainstream media doesn't listen to from Native people itself, right? Like if a Native person gets interviewed by the mainstream media, they're just like, oh, what the fuck, you know, I don't care about that person. We have allies there that the mainstream media can talk to. White people have a different response to that. It's just the way they are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, are there any other actions or fights or anything else you want to bring up like about the Mi'kmaq or that area other than that one?
I mean, the main thing I always like to stress to people is like the Mi'kmaq people, they were the ones who, you know, first declared war when we realized that this treaty that Cornwallis was trying to push wasn't going to be beneficial in any way to anybody. we were the first ones to fight back against this. And in anger and revenge of this, Cornwallis then instituted a program where, you know, indigenous scalps were traded for money. And this is where a lot of the old wealth of Canada itself that still exists today comes from, is coming from the British Crown paying for indigenous heads, essentially. And by the way, this law is still on the books today in my province.
Wait, you're saying that if you bring an indigenous scalp, the Canadian government will pay you money for that?
Technically, it's on the books. They've never taken it off the books. Actually, we have talked about how, like, what would be a big scandal is if somebody that was like good at, you know, making prosthetics or some sort of like special effects, and I'm sure you can imagine where I'm going with this, to make that law that's still on the books for whatever fucking reason look really bad, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's like that's amazing that it's still on the books. And so like, yeah, because I guess, you know, on the East Coast you're kind of the closest to, you know, the major colonizer there, right? Hudson's Bay Company. I mean, you know, that was kind of the early times. When the British, you know, came through, like, you know, obviously the fur trade, right, and like, you know, on top of indigenous scalps, also like, right, getting the beaver furs and that kind of thing. What was like the history like during that period with the Mi'kmaq? Like, how do they interact with colonizers then?
I mean, I think Mi'kmaq people were kind of always militant when it came to against British people, right? Like, French people, really, when they were here, they controlled the fur trade and they interacted with Mi'kmaq people through the fur trade and stuff. But the British, of course, wanted the fur trade and the land itself, and the Mi'kmaq kind of realized this. And of course, Mi'kmaq people did fight back and asked, like, how can this French person be giving away Mi'kmaq land and stuff, you know? But then the English came in like an even more violent way. And then, like, actually, like, a lot of like what's known as Thanksgiving is like based on not just what settlers call Iroquois, but on Mi'kmaq harvest festivals, and like this is what like they sort of copied, right? And the very first one was Mi'kmaq people helping settlers to not fucking die, and the very next Thanksgiving is us fighting this war. And settlers, instead of like turning against Cornwallis and stuff, going along with it and fighting native people, right? So that really kind of showed us like what our fight was against. So yeah, Mi'kmaq people were always kind of very militant against the English, I would say. And because of that, of course, we faced a very violent reaction, in much the same way, like, you know, with more primitive, of course, weapons, but in much the same way, like with Palestine today.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, just, you know, of it is for the Thanksgiving. You know, I'm thinking of all the people that are asking questions or are gonna have interesting conversations with their family members about that and why they aren't celebrating Thanksgiving. But and that's interesting that you bring up that it's actually based upon a lot of the early interactions with your people. What's the other thing I was thinking? Yeah, so when I guess what do you say? I mean, this is I'm not saying that I say this. Obviously, I don't. But what do you say to people, right, who come after Native people and they say, well, you still have these hunting practices and those are abusive to animals, and so we need we Canadians, we white people need to be in control, otherwise you'll commit these harms to all these animals. Like, you kind of know the people that I'm talking about, right? What do you say to people who say that kind of thing?
I mean, I try and remind them that not only it's you know, you can look in all of history, and native hunting practices have never once endangered not only the animals that are being hunted, but the environment itself, right? It's the the colonizers who come over and create this system of farming or this system of husbandry that is completely unsustainable to the environment, right? And not only that, but a lot of like what white vegans, unfortunately, like what they consider to be sustainable in our actual environment in the way capitalism operates today is not as sustainable as they imagine it to be. It has the potential, yes, in a factory setting, but it's not done that way today, right? And I mean, we see this in Canada employed all the time, especially against Inuit people, where they try and conflate like this baby seal cubbing with baby seal clubbing, which is a practice that is it's a thing that happens very minority, and it's settlers who do it. But what they do is conflate that with Inuit people hunting seal, adult seal, right? And then you have people like Paul McCartney who makes a big demonstration out of it and says, "Oh well, I'm not going to go to Canada until this baby seal clubbing ends," right? And it ends up being spearheaded not against the minority of settlers who are actually doing this, but it ends up being used against First Nations seal hunters who need to hunt seals to actually survive. Like in a lot of Inuit places, you can't survive any other way. They have to hunt seal, right? And even if it's not a matter of hunting it, the way that we literally hunt here is done in a sustainable way. And I think in a revolutionary way, where if we were able to teach others about our rules and our practices for raising animals and hunting animals, then you would see a completely different way of distributing meat and eating meat, and it would be understood in a different way.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. That I mean, I never put that one together. But I remember when I was young, even in the '90s, you'd have all these, like, kind of like a side article being like, "Seal clubbing continues," and you don't. I would never get the full story, but it makes total sense now that the baby seal clubbing. It would be like jokes and like late night TV, like, "Oh, are you gonna go club some seals?" But it's because it was propagated. It was propaganda propagated right out there, just kind of like, this is something that's happening in the North, and it's Native people doing that in the kind of the way that like, oh well, in this Asian country, they're all just eating the bats and they're all just doing forced labor. In North Korea, what are we, North Korea, right? That's like, that's what they always would say. That's like the go-to attack, and it's just kind of like out there in everybody's kind of mind. Nobody knows where that came from, right? Or like, oh, in Hawaii was just this little place with these little shacks, and they didn't have nothing, and then we saved them. It's kind of like, it's just kind of this idea that's propagated. So it's interesting. I didn't know that was specifically where it came from. I just want to say there's this movie. I recently watched it, and I'm not an Inuit person, but it's called Slashback, which is it features like Native youth hunting in Native Inuit youth hunting, and then and they're fighting an alien. It's kind of like the Thing. It's like a horror movie, but then it features Native hunting as like a normal thing. That's definitely not about harming baby seals. Like, they're hunting adult creatures for
males, yeah.
Adult males for food, right? And
by the way, if they don't, there's literally what you end up having is an overrun of seals that then endanger other animals, right? And that's why, again, that the practice that has been going on for so long now. And I mean, it's the same, like you were talking about forests earlier, and that reminded me here as well. Like the same way that indigenous people of all nations here tend to the forest, like planting diversified trees and stuff. And a lot of people don't realize, but the reason why the Canadian forest fires this time were so bad is because of these carbon offset forests that colonizers plant. And the reason why they burn so bad is because they tend to plant trees that grow as fast as possible. And those tend to be softwood trees, which have a very shallow root base. And I'm sure, as you know, softwood burns much, much faster than hardwood and other forms of trees. And if you want a healthy forest, you need different trees all together, right? Yeah. You need softwoods with hardwoods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's like that's interesting that it's like in order to kind of like look like, as a settler colonial entities trying to look like they're doing the right thing, they're planting, but they're not planting in a way that in a long term is actually making the area more sustainable, but it makes them look good in the short term, right? Like, well, we planted X number of trees in an Excel spreadsheet for like in a government office or in a corporate office somewhere. They kind of cover their butt. That looks good. This it reminds me of I worked in U.S. government, corporate, and nonprofits, and that sounds a lot like what we had to do is make it look like we're helping, while not really helping that much. But a lot of corporations and colonial capitalist governments and entities make themselves look like they are being green, right? And it's kind of like greenwashing, right?
Oh God, yeah, yeah. It allows them to launder their own reputations, right? That's part of what it's all about. It's putting on that face of, oh look, here we're doing it. And meanwhile you have indigenous people screaming at them like, this is gonna blow up in your face. And of course they don't care because all they can see is short-term profits because that's capitalism, right? And again, I'd stress all the time to communists here that the foundation of capitalism, what Marx called primitive accumulation, was colonialism, right? And that's why I say like that the prime thing, what I hear Marx say all the time, the prime thing that we're fighting against is capitalism. I say no, it's colonialism because that's what sustains capitalism, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a message for in the U.S. Discourse is patriot socialism, and we're gonna deal with the capitalism while sidestepping the colonialism question and several other ones along with that. Is definitely it's that's you're never gonna really get rid of it. That's a big can of worms for sure, because there's a lot of people who are kind of talking about, to my mind it's kind of like if you just change, the economic, some of the economic equation, but you still have that, as we were talking about, that fundamentally unjust, like it's not based on respect, abusive relationship that's kind of still festering there, right? Then you leave the infection to kind of come back. And so, I think it's so important. If you're a non-native person, it's important for people to understand.
And I think just on a functional level too, like how do you get like the idea of fighting for socialism first and then you have liberation? How do you get native people to unite behind the struggle where you're telling them, oh, don't worry, we'll give you liberation, as organize with us and then we'll give you liberation? It's like we've heard similar things before. It's, you can't expect the only way you're going to unite with like native people is to unite with their struggle and recognize that is the spearhead of revolution here in the West, is native people struggling for land back and for their liberation. And through the course of that is how socialism can come to be realized here, right? And I see too many communist parties in the West where like it's good, like I said before in my stream earlier, it's good that the Canadian Communist Party, for example, has given money to Cuba and has done so lots of times. That's good and all, because Canada does a blockade. But at the same time, it has never given anything at all to any First Nations liberation struggles here, and it calls itself the Communist Party. It's like I get helping Cuba and everything, but you kind of have an obligation here if you're going to call yourself a revolutionary party,
That just sounds very, very, as young people say, that sounds very sus to me. Communist Party. The other thing I just want to dovetail on that is that it's kind of like thinking here we'll get socialism or liberation without supporting indigenous people. This is like being part of like the Israeli Communist Party or the Israeli left. There are some Israelis who call themselves leftists, and I very, very disgusted when I see somebody even just an Israeli talking. It's like, oh my God, what is this, Nazi Germany? With this, But even the Israeli left, and I've seen some of it. It's like, it is just anyway. Long story short, if you wanted to, it's just horrifying. If you wanted to, get liberation, it'd be going, we're gonna fight for liberation in that whole region. But it's going to be like, if enough Israelis get enough of the, if we get some better, the thing is Israel already has a universal healthcare system, but only for them, right? Only for them. And it's kind of like, right? It's like, so if we have like better quality of life for the average Israeli, we've reached the socialism. But you have this entire genocidal mass displacement based, it's even more stark there because it's happening. You can see it happening right now in real time, like 1800 style, just mass wiping out people, native people to steal land. And yeah, so it's like, that's, it's like it's why it's such a good metaphor now. And I say like Hawaii is very similar, but like not as extreme because they're not, using those bombs, but it's basically it's the same thing. Also in Hawaii to be like, well, we'll have people ask me, and sometimes some settlers will ask Silver Spook, how did the white anarchists, or I don't know, just the non-native, anarchist, or this other formation, or these people, this, the whites, Socialist Rifle Association. I'm not saying that, you can't do defense or do those things, but that's like, how did this or other Western left help you on Mauna Kea struggle or in Red Hill? And I gotta tell, it's like a lot of them, it caused more disruption because they were just like trying to get nice photo ops with Hawaiians on the mountain. It's kind of like, again, it's kind of like thinking about the short term. Oh, this will make me look really good when I make my YouTube video about how much I love Native Hawaiians as a leftist, as a Western leftist. And it's like, we actually had to kick some of those people off the mountain. It's like, we're trying to get the U.S. military to stop, we're fighting the U.S. military. I mean, technically, the U.S. military is bombing all over our mountain. The police, the biggest police and military organization, mass organization, was to stop us on that mountain. And we can't have undisciplined people, not serious people, right? Who are not really here for the actual complete liberation. Because you actually, this is a part of the downfall of a lot of left formations, right? And again and again, right? I've seen, I don't know how many like socialists, Marxists, anarchists, all kind of, organizations get together and then they collapse, right? When somebody sells the other ones out, there's like some kind of, people are not communicating and like, rooting out, right? Those, they're not doing the self-act. They're talking about self-crit, but they're not like rooting out abusive relationships or problems inside their organizations. And then things just collapses again and again. And like, and so, anyway, I forget exactly how that dovetails directly.
Yeah,
but,
and I actually think they take like I think they take a dogmatic view where what they'll try and do is they see Marxism, Leninism, or the example of USSR or Vietnam or DPRK, and they try to like carbon copy that, or try to like just study these theories and base all their activity like on what these theories say. And like, what Marx and Engels and what Lenin and Ho Chi Minh and what all these people wrote about is great. And what they're writing about is their own experiences. But at the end of the day, you have to base your own revolutionary struggle on your own conditions first, right? Like, you can learn lessons from previous theories, but you can't base your own theory that you're creating here on those that exist before. And I think that's like where a lot of like modern communist parties in the West get stuck. They're trying to like copy what they're seeing there. So they get like stuck in these worker councils as being the leading force of revolution, or they take the working class as a monolith and only look at class relations and sort of, like you say, ignore the colonial question. Like, I think in the West, you have to realize, like, to put it in plain English for everybody, you have to realize that like the most revolutionary people here isn't the working class as a monolith, right? I would argue that a lot of like what would be considered traditionally as lumpen proletariat, semi-employed, and even like small business owners in indigenous communities tend to be more revolutionary than much of the white working class, because they're more likely to be fooled by this propaganda that teaches them that settler colonialism might benefit you. It might not right now, but it might, right? If you uphold this white colonial system.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking as an indigenous, a small business owner, I can definitely attest to that. The thing is, and what I would say, this is a former attempted white person anonymous confession. Like I bring it up frequently that I was studying Like I went to this fancy $20,000 private school because my dad. I got in there because my dad taught there. I got like free tuition because I'm a son of a underpaid employee. But like they wanted me to become like a real estate agent or some kind of like I was gonna become a high frequency trading, basically like programming for a major bank to make economy scream, like horrible stuff, just horrible stuff. And they were like, my parents were like, that's really great, because they've been kind of like convinced that in their the boomers are deeply obviously propagandized during the Cold War. The U.S. has a brainwashing system they installed in Hawaii that calls itself the public schools, and so they really were like, that's great, you can be a settler, you're not really a white person, but just act as part of that system, and you can get a good job in the United States working for one of these big banks or the military or something, and some kind of you'll do something really good, and then you'll make a lot of money, and it's I think it was like being like, or just like having to kind of like accident, sometimes I bring up, if these Maori professors, right, came to my university and if they hadn't shown up and told me, I took some of their classes and they were like, you were colonized, right? And they were the ones who actually told me like, stop going down that path. And it kind of like, pushed me off of that towards, doing like what you were saying, like being, an indigenous person resisting all of this process. And if I was just, a white, if my family were just, there are many white settlers just in Hawaii, then like the probability that I would have gone down the path is like very much lower, it's way lower. And so, it's really true. It's like, it's not like somebody's fault that their ancestors are all British or French or whatever, whatever, but it's kind of like, you got to realize that that's like, those are like the racism and the colonialism that are part of the same system ultimately is like a major factor in like, especially in places like the United States and Canada that are white settler colonies.
It forces us into integrating theory with practice.
Yeah.
Where, like you say, like a lot of settlers, like, again, it's not their fault, but they just don't necessarily have that necessity of putting theory into practice. Like it's always, I think it's reflected in some of the reaction to the idea of revolution, where, look at what a normal settler's response to revolution is, oh, but it might be disrupted for my kids or something, or it might my kids might be in danger. But for First Nations people or for colonized people, it's like, if we don't do revolution, my kids are in danger now, and like that's the difference of what necessitates you putting theory into practice, and what for like a lot of, I think, European people, a lot of settlers, it's like just a book club, just a study session.
Yeah, it's like it's a thing I can do now, not quite, but kind of like as another thing for my entertainment. I often find that that's unfortunately not saying that everybody who's in those book clubs are only there for fun, but the level of seriousness, that's what the level when the rubber hits the road, like when the actual actions happen, and reading now and talking about it, that's one thing, but then like when it's like, okay, now we have to like work hard for months and possibly we're going to get arrested, and and then who's really going to be there? And a lot of people aren't there. And so, yeah, that's really true. But anyways, I should probably wrap this so that we can move on. But, if there's anything else that you were like, you really wanted to talk about or bring up, just one last thing. I forgot to ask this earlier because I like to do it, is like, what's a doesn't have to necessarily be like the traditional, but what's like a food that you would traditionally eat around not Thanksgiving, but around the harvest time during the banquet, celebration time?
It would be like normally, of course, caribou and corn and yeah, potato. That's mostly and of course eel as well.
Oh, eel.
Yes, yeah, lots of fish. A lot of times during what we would have harvest time, for a lot of Mi'kmaq people, they would move inwards away from the sea because it would be a little bit warmer. Moved it in where I am now, what would be called Kejimekujik now, which is the most sacred like place where we a lot of Mi'kmaq people, the prime place to go would be around Kejimkujik Lake. And, you know, you could get eel, you could get rabbit, you could get caribou, all this other stuff, right? And like some of the tragedy, I think, thinking back or thinking now is, you know, when settlers came here, they made Kejimkujik into a rod and gun club. And, you know, part of the settlers wanting to have game to hunt and stuff, they also brought over white-tailed deer. And now the white-tailed deer, they carried a disease that affected caribou and moose. And that's why here and now you never see caribou and moose ever. Like the only moose you see in some bog areas where like white-tailed deer don't survive very well. But, you know, if you want moose, you go to Newfoundland. And to me, that's like, and caribou is even more rare. It's just like, you know, I just think back to those meals when there was caribou, and it's like, imagine tasting that. Like I very rare occasion that I've gotten to.
Yeah. Well, you know, maybe someday as we complete this, slowly restore. I mean, it might take some time, but you know, hopefully one day we'll have caribou, you know, roaming more in your area. We can hope.
And I think like with orgs like Chunkaluda, we'll be able to do it. We're doing it with the buffalo first, caribou next.
All right, yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear how that project goes. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's been before I say goodbye, in Hawaii, we're gonna have our sweet potato. We usually have a dish called lau lau. It's like leaves of the taro wrapped around traditionally pork or fish or something, and then we cook that in an underground earth oven with like superheated like lava rocks for all night. And we cook it in a giant like the whole community puts all the food they have in a giant oven, and then it's all cooked. Nobody gets any money for it. It all goes into a giant under the earth oven, and then it all gets distributed by the most able according to need. So the young, and then the elderly, and then the disabled, and the young and elderly and the least able get served first by the, you know, young 20 to 40 year olds. And that's actually what a luau is. Luau is living communism that the United States in the West, colonial capitalists destroyed. And that's what we would normally do. But we will be having sweet potato and sugar cane. And we're making sweet potato leaves, make like a spinach stir fry thing. And but yeah. Anyways, it has been super awesome to talk to you and meet you, Larry. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of really awesome work. Everybody should follow Larry if you haven't. I think most people here probably know Larry. If you don't, follow Leaping Larry. And all. Yeah, it's been really educational and. Yeah, great.
Thank you, comrade. It was very much an honor to have me on here. I've watched these panels before of yours, and I've seen you on. I mean, I've played your game Neo Feud. I love it, and Decolonators. Huge fan of your work. So yeah, it was very much my honor to come on here. I'm happy to any other time. In Mi'kmaq, we say "I do you" when we say goodbye.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for playing Neo Feud and Decolonators. And in Hawaii, we do say aloha and ahui ho, or until we meet again. Okay, bye everybody. Aloha.